Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
I'm Dawn.
And I'm Cole.
And Scottish Murders is a true crime podcast dedicated to people from or living in Scotland.
Just like anywhere else in the world, these murders can be truly horrific and shocking, and we want to shine more light upon them.
Join us every 2 weeks on Scottish Murders, where we'll bring you cases both solved and unsolved, giving you an insight into the other side of bonnie Scotland.
Find us wherever you stream your podcasts, as well as on social media.
Join us there. Bye!
Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck a lot.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Mountain Murders.
Happy 6th birthday / anniversary to the podcast.
Yay!
December 28th was officially 6 years, Dylan, since we first recorded an episode.
That's just crazy to think about.
Way back in 2018, our first case, Karen Stiles, we covered that. Since then, over 500 episodes.
That's crazy.
That's a lot of content.
And we never imagined that we'd still be going 6 years later. And it's all because of our listeners and our patrons.
So many awesome listeners, patrons. We've really made some amazing friends through the podcast. I'm so grateful for that.
Yes, me too.
It's honestly like the best part of Mountain Murders.
It truly is.
It
truly is.
The people we've met along the way.
And I think Heather's done a wonderful job with the case selection. And today we are going to cover something a little more well-known. We do that from time to time. And I'm excited for this because I remember when this happened, it was a big deal. But I never really dug into the real nuts and bolts of the case. So I can't wait for this story.
Well, Dylan, I have a very personal connection to this case, and I've wanted to cover it for a long time. So I figure here we are, 6 years in, it's time.
Okay.
I actually lived in Silver Spring, Maryland, while this case was unfolding, and I can honestly say it was truly 23 days of terror.
Wow.
As we get into the nuts and bolts of the case and learn more of the details, I lived within like 1 to 2 miles of the spots where most of these incidents happened.
Gosh. And some people are like, well, what case? Some people already know from just that information you said. And some people are like, what case is it? What is it, Heather?
They see the name of the episode, so they know, Dylan. We're going to be talking about the Beltway sniper.
Oh, my gosh.
All right. Are you ready to get into this?
I am ready. Let's go.
You have been ready.
Yeah.
You've been ready for a minute. Montgomery County, Maryland is the most populous county in the state. A fast-growing area, the population increased by almost 10% in as many years, which is quite a big growth. That's a lot of growth.
That's huge growth in a small amount of time.
It is a suburb that adjoins Washington, D.C., where towns like Silver Spring, Bethesda, Germantown, Rockville, and Gaithersburg lie. The average household income is 20th highest among U.S. counties, with most residents holding postgraduate degrees. It's an important business and research center, being the epicenter for biotechnology in the Mid-Atlantic, with research being carried out by prestigious institutions such as Johns Hopkins University and Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Many large firms are based within the county, including Lockheed Martin, Marriott International, Ritz-Carlton, Geico, Choice Hotels, and many, many more. There are also federal agencies based in Montgomery County. Considered one of the best places to live in Maryland, but the crime rate has steadily increased over recent years, despite the fact that it's still considered a prime spot.
Okay.
Now, back in 2002, Montgomery County was considered a relatively safe area. Things have changed over the course of the 20 years since I lived there, for sure. On average, there might be 15 murders a year for the entire county, which compared to Baltimore City had about 10 times more violent crime.
That's so scary.
So it didn't seem outrageous considering the population was pushing near 1 million and also its close proximity to Washington, D.C. Within 15 hours, there would be a wave of 5 murders. Terrorism in the backyards of Maryland's suburbs and Northern Virginia. Chaos gripped the area as residents feared the worst. It was only a year since September 11th, 2001 changed the nation and left us gripped with fear.
Oh, yeah. See, I forgot that it was not that long after after 9/11. So, people are still worried about events like this unfolding, right?
Well, right. I mean, the Pentagon had been attacked in Washington, D.C. This was only like 6 months after the anthrax scare.
Yeah, there was a lot going on.
There was a lot going on, and people were on edge. October 2nd of 2002 was like any other day in early fall. Around 5:20 p.m., a shot was fired through a window of a Michael's Craft store in Aspen Hill, Maryland. Fortunately, no one was injured. The bullet went through the storefront window, missing the cashier who was working at a register. The incident was treated as a random shooting. The Maryland State Police had such a heightened focus on terrorism that the shooting went nearly unnoticed. Local police assumed it was a careless act of violence or some drunk or vandal hell-bent on tearing up someone else's property.
So they just think it's some asshole who popped off a shot and it went through the storefront window.
Yeah. There were dozens of calls every day relating to destruction of property, so it didn't seem like it was that far of a reach.
But, I mean, when you really take a step back, this is a very serious issue. This is an occupied building with a lot of, many people in it. And just randomly this bullet flies through the window and just happens, luckily, not to hit anyone. I mean, it's a pretty big deal.
Well, in the northern, more rural parts of the county, it was normal to find a bullet hole or two punched through road signs. Maybe a little less likely to find that in the city.
Yeah, I think anyone out on country roads has, no matter what part of the country you're in, you've likely seen a road sign that's been shot. Some good old boys or girls, half lit, riding around drinking,
getting down on the farm,
got guns in the car, and it's just something. I bet you won't do it, Jimmy. I bet you won't stop at you. Shoot that yield sign right there.
Shooting and shouting at the signs.
Shooting and shouting. And then
small town Saturday night.
That happens a lot around small towns.
Hal Ketchum said it best. Now, after 9/11, many law enforcement agencies and departments shifted gears with a focus on terrorism. The Maryland State Police had established undercover operators who had begun infiltrating groups identified as suspect or were known to include people on the terrorist watch list. The Criminal Intelligence Division had hundreds of potential targets as well as critical infrastructure and was attempting to harden those targets through working with the federal government as well as citizens and private industry. Maryland, Northern Virginia, and the D.C. area had military installations and high-value terrorist targets. Critical infrastructure, which included bridges, stadiums, communication hubs, and other public and private structures that, if attacked, could cause a serious disruption in daily life. And because of that, a random shooting with no injuries or fatalities was low priority, sadly. Until it happened again on the same day.
Oh, God.
Shortly after the first incident, a 55-year-old man named James D. Martin was loading groceries into the back of a car at Shoppers Food Warehouse parking lot, which was located on Georgia Avenue in Wheaton, Maryland. Martin, a program analyst with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, was shot in the head.
Oh my God.
The .223 caliber bullet killed him on the spot. Martin's murder received very little attention on the evening news.
I mean, I understand. And I remember back during this time, the whole nation was still shook, and everybody was very suspicious of what anyone was doing, and still this huge tragic event had happened. But I mean, this man just took a high velocity round to the head, and it doesn't even make the front page. I mean, that's pretty crazy to me.
Martin was born May 7th, 1947 in St. Louis, Missouri. I wanted to mention, before we really get into this case, I have made a real effort to try to learn more about the victims who were killed during these attacks. So I'm going to try as much as I can to give everyone some background information, because these were real people who led lives and had families, and it's so sad what happened to them.
It is, and very little, if I recall correctly, very little was really said about them during this event.
Exactly. I mean, I was living in the area at the time. Like I said, I was in Silver Spring. I worked in Northwest Washington, D.C. I often commuted either by car or train to work. I drove by some of the spots we will be talking about today on my daily commute. These were all within a 1 to 2 mile radius of my home. And even at that time, I learned so little about the victims. It was just like a name that you heard on the news.
So this could have just as easily been another podcast talking about you being shot in this story. You could have been the victim.
I was so scared.
Anyone could have been the victim. The randomness of this was the true heart of the terror.
You know, we have a friend, Scott, back home, and Scott is quite a groovy guy. We had a conversation because he's from Maryland, and he was living, in the Baltimore, D.C. kind of area around this time, and we had a pretty lengthy conversation once about living there and kind of living through this, and how it was, it was terror. It was like true terror. And he was working as a cameraman for like a news team and was on the scene at some of these. I mean, it's just mind-blowing, because it truly was like anyone could be a victim. Your friend, your coworker, your spouse, your child. I mean, you just really didn't know what was coming next.
The random element is really what messes with the public and people's psyche, right? I've even been around industrial accidents that were completely random and literally could have been any one of us in that group, and it just happened to get the one guy. And the randomness really messes people up. I guess it's just the thought of that could have been me.
Yeah.
And then you instantly feel guilty because you're glad it wasn't you. Does that make sense? You're glad it wasn't you, but it was somebody else.
And we're going to learn just through some of the biographies here of the victims. They were truly amazing people, taken so senselessly. So Martin was born May 7th, 1947 in St. Louis, Missouri. His family had known hardships living in rural Missouri. James's father died when he was just 8 years old, and his mother had to take in laundry to pay the bills. They didn't have a lot, but they had each other. James's mother adored him, and he idolized her. He graduated from the business school at Southeast Missouri State University in 1969, working his way through college by being a short order cook and also taking on odd jobs. After graduation, he joined the Navy and was stationed in Washington during the Vietnam War. Afterwards, he took a job as a congressional aide on Capitol Hill. It was during this time, about 15 years earlier, that he had met his wife, Billie, at a St. Patrick's Day gathering. He was devoted to her and their 11-year-old son, Ben. The husband and father resided in the Stonegate neighborhood, where he was known for being, quote, extraordinarily friendly. Martin had a reputation around the neighborhood for, quote, making a big fuss over trick-or-treaters at Halloween. And all the kids made an effort to stop by his house to celebrate. Like, he went all out.
So
Costumes, decorations, like the good candy, and like it was a really big deal.
Oh, yeah, you have to stop by that house in the neighborhood because he's the fun guy.
Yeah, and he really it seems like he really loved kids. He volunteered at Shepherd Elementary School, which, from what I understand, was an urban, like an inner city school that, you know, they lacked funds and they didn't have a lot of the up-to-date technology that, like, his son's school had. So it was almost like this pet project that he took on, Shepherd Elementary School. He began judging science fairs there. He would speak at PTA events. And he arranged for this like really big computer donation program to make sure that the school was equipped with all of the updated computers, printers, like everything that these kids would need to be able to compete with the suburban elementary schools.
Wow. See, that guy could have just been like, hey, my kid goes to a good school. I'm happy with that. And, you know, and used a lot of his free time for something he wanted to do just for himself or his family, but he didn't. And see, that's extraordinary when someone goes through those lengths.
You know, I think it speaks to his character and also, you know, maybe his background, having grown up, being an underprivileged kid, single parent, living in rural Missouri, and didn't have a lot, you know, and then he was at a point in his life where he was able to give back.
Right.
And it was really important for him to do that. And I think that's very admirable. He was also a Boy Scout leader and was a church trustee. And as a matter of fact, Martin had been picking up groceries for his church's youth group at the time he was killed.
Gosh. I mean, this guy's always, you know, setting up something to help other people.
Martin was also a Civil War buff and an amateur genealogist. And his friends and family say he was aspiring to like write a book on the subjects. He was really interested in collecting like Civil War memorabilia, artifacts, and, you know, visited battlegrounds and was just like really interested in that part of American history.
And those two things go hand in hand when someone's very interested in the history of this country or certain wars. My uncle, for instance, is a Civil War buff.
He certainly is.
He's been an extra in some of the big movies. He
was in Glory.
Yeah, he's done all
Gods
kinds.
and Monsters.
All kinds of big reenactments. And he's totally into genealogy and people's heritage as well.
Yeah, he's like an encyclopedia. Like, it's amazing. Your uncle has like a computer brain.
He does have a computer brain.
He's like the smartest person I've ever met. So Montgomery County didn't have many like street killings or drive-by shootings. This random act of violence committed by a seemingly unknown assailant was highly strange. Any number of motives could have applied: robbery, revenge, jealousy, etc. There had been no reports of an altercation or fight leading up to Martin's murder. However, one more unusual detail did stand out to law enforcement. The ballistics showed it was a high-powered rifle. Captain Nancy Demme with the Montgomery County Police Department informed Chief Charles Moose, quote, "I don't know what we have here, but it's different from your regular homicide."
Well, yeah, around any urban setting, even in suburbia, you typically don't see rifle rounds being fired, right?
No.
It's usually a pistol or a shotgun.
Yeah, some kind of handgun.
Right. And that's what you usually see. So I could imagine this struck the investigators as odd. And I know that the system doesn't always connect things as quickly as it should, but you've also had another high velocity round shot through the storefront window there at Michael's on the same day. And that would be a good connection, you know, very quickly if that had been made, but yeah.
The victim appeared to be a nice, normal, middle-aged guy with his sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened, and a company badge still pinned to his shirt. His lunchbox was sitting on the passenger seat, like he was headed home after work. So when he'd been pulled into the shopper's warehouse, or when he pulled into it, the parking lot was jammed. Like they went back and watched video, and he's like struggling to find a space. I mean, this is a busy, probably, you know, what do we say? It's in the 5 o'clock hour. Everyone's getting off work, crammed in the grocery store. It's not like this is an empty parking lot.
Right.
I mean, that's the other part of it that's just so mind-blowing.
And nobody has seen anything.
The victim had not been robbed, and the shots appeared to come from a distance. The witnesses said the shot sounded like a truck tire blowing up. Forensics was going to the Michaels store to see if there were any similarities. Above register number 5, they saw where a bullet had pierced the lighted sign. Despite no evidence at the time, officers believed these incidents were probably connected.
So they did quickly connect the two events.
They did.
Okay, good.
The cops were stumped. Martin had been a model citizen, a devoted husband and father, a valued member of the community, and a dedicated employee. By 11 p.m., investigators learned the victim had no criminal record, but there were no good witnesses either. Due to the time of the shooting, many of the businesses were starting to close up in the area or had already closed, so there weren't many people around to speak with. A very clear videotape taken by the store's security camera mounted outside showed the victim the moment of the shooting. Martin had been walking away from his car toward the store. In the frame, 2 other people were visible. The victim just dropped. Bang, a shot from behind. Martin had a very small entry wound and a large exit wound.
Yes, well, that doesn't surprise me considering the kind of round it is.
As Major Crimes listened to the report on the Martin homicide, Assistant Chief D. Walker thought, quote, "This doesn't happen here. Maybe it's a drug deal or a gambling debt. Maybe it's a hit. Maybe the guy's having an affair, but this is weird." The investigators were going to start again in the morning. The first 8 to 10 hours of a homicide is also the time when most murderers give themselves away. Killing a human being is generally so personal and emotional that a perpetrator has a hard time appearing normal, at least in most cases. They might have blood on their clothing or be overtly emotional or maybe not go home afterwards. People who know them well will kind of recognize that something is off or not right.
Yeah, because unless you're just a raging sociopath or psychopath, most people, even if you've gone and done this willingly, done this homicide or killed someone, most people can hardly live with it. You know what I mean? It comes out some way. Either they confess to someone they know, or they just, just to get off their chest, or they're just acting totally out of character, right? Very nervous. Paranoid, just out of sorts,
Yeah. Or maybe not even go home at all, like I mentioned, because we've heard in some cases where the killer takes the day off from work, doesn't go home, is kind of missing or out of pocket for a period of time.
Yeah, and that's why it's so chilling when you hear stories about people who commit murder and then go grab something to eat like nothing happened.
And they go sit down at the J&S cafeteria and enjoy like a nice meatloaf.
Yeah,
right?
that's very strange, and that's even scarier.
But when there's nothing, no real crime scene, so to speak, because there's not, this high-powered rifle shooting from a distance. Where's the crime? Aside from where the victim fell, you don't exactly know the location of this crime scene.
No, you can look at the video.
The direction where it came from, but you don't really know where it came from.
No, you have no idea how far out the shooter was, where they were located. It makes it really hard.
And there's no evidence of the crime scene. All you have is a bullet and the victim. And there are no witnesses and no way of guessing a motive. That can all take some time to figure out. So let's talk a little bit about Chief Moose, who became the face of this investigation, and he will be a bit of a controversial figure, and we'll talk more about that in part 2. But I want to give you a little background on him, on Chief Moose. It has been said that Chief Moose and Montgomery County were a bit of an odd fit. He had never actually, sought out a job in Montgomery County. He had applied for the top position in Washington, D.C. with the Metropolitan Police and hadn't even gotten a reply back thanks for applying. They just completely disregarded him, it seems.
Oh, so he was trying to be the chief of the Capitol Police?
Yeah.
Okay.
Charles Moose was born August 4th, 1954 in New York City. As a toddler, his family relocated to Lexington, North Carolina. Obviously, a much smaller area, probably a bit of a culture shock for the family. As a toddler, like I said, they moved. Educational opportunities were scarce in this area, and Moose attended segregated schools up until the 7th grade. Growing up, Moose didn't like the police. As a young person, if people had said he's going to grow up and be a police chief, no one would have believed it.
Oh,
he was
okay.
pretty much like, fuck the police. Very anti-cop. Because he saw how many people of color, like his friends, his family, his schoolmates, especially in the South, how people of color were treated by law enforcement, often just hassled for no reason, treated very poorly. This is like during the 60s, the civil rights movement.
Yeah, and the more economically challenged an area is, the more this seems to happen, right? It seems to be even worse, right?
Moose wanted to become a criminal defense attorney. He actually wanted to be an attorney because he thought, like, I'll be able to take on these bad cops in court. He attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, earning a bachelor's degree in U.S. history and graduating in 1975. That year, his life took a surprising turn when he took a job with the Portland Police Bureau in Oregon as a patrolman, something he had never really expected. But, you know, he said once he started working as a police officer that his point of view changed. I mean, he recognized how he had grown up and how law enforcement had, like, treated him and treated people of color. But he was also like, you know, but it was disappointing to see that, like, some of the crimes that were being committed by people who look like me.
Right.
And so he was like, you know, it's kind of finding this balance of, like, you know, arresting the bad guys, but also not going out of your way to, like, terrorize certain groups of people.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what's a tricky situation for law enforcement in these types of areas is they also have people preying on their own community living in these areas at a higher percentage or higher volume. So you have to have a presence. You're going to be there. You're going to go to where the crimes are, right, to do police work. But you can also choose not to look down on everyone in the area and harass people for no reason, right? You should just apply logic and common sense to a situation.
Well, I think Moose is a really interesting character, and that's why I wanted to talk about him a little at length. So in 18 years, he was able to climb to the position of chief of the Portland Police.
Well, and it's also a good way to enact change is from within, right?
Right. And we're going to talk more about that. So he then earned a master's of public administration degree from Portland State University in 1984 and a PhD in urban studies and criminology in 1993. So he's a very well-educated man.
Well, yeah, and he...
I mean, most police chiefs don't have a PhD.
Well, no, but you can see that he has a passion for this work, and it's more than just a job for him. You know what I mean?
Moose earned a reputation in Portland for having, quote, an explosive temper, but there was also no argument that he got results. During his time, he reduced the crime rate significantly. He was an outspoken critic of racial profiling as a technique of police work, and he taught a class in gender conflict resolution alongside his wife, Sandy Herman Moose, who was an attorney. They taught like a college level class together. And
this is many years ago, so he was kind of ahead of his time on some of these techniques and things that he was talking about.
Steadily, he got results that mattered. Moose was also key in catching the Forest Park killer, Todd Allen Reed, who raped and murdered 3 homeless women in the Portland area from April to June of 1999. So he caught a serial killer, like, pretty quickly. Reed, a sex offender, was also a top suspect in 2 other murders dating back to 1987 in Gresham, Oregon. Colleagues would describe Moose as possessing integrity, self-confidence, and rational thinking skills, as opposed to emotional reactions. Like, they described him as almost being like very stoic. Like, he approached everything, like even something that was super upsetting, like he did not let his emotions cloud his critical thinking.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like he's wired to be a cop.
That was like, I guess, a real, like, a positive that people pointed to, is that he was just kind of cool, calm, and collected, just the facts, ma'am, that kind of cop, you know, and just didn't let emotions cloud his judgment at all. And this will actually be very critical in ending the 23 days of terror in and around the nation's capital. Because you have to have someone who is calm, level-headed, smart to be able to take on the situation we're discussing.
Well, yeah, because it's a very emotionally charged situation.
So the following morning, which is October 3rd of 2002, around 7:41 a.m., 39-year-old James Sonny Buchanan was shot while mowing grass in front of the Fitzgerald Auto Dealership on Rockville Pike. Sonny never had children of his own, but was deeply committed to family. He doted on his 2 nieces and 2 nephews and a great niece. He was also on the regional board of the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Washington. He loved to teach the children about planting seeds, nurturing them, watching the seeds grow. He regularly pitched in at the holiday parties and often ran the annual Christmas tree lot, standing out in the cold all night long to raise money for the Boys and Girls Club. He had even given one kid money to pay for college. He had been a Crime Stoppers hotline volunteer. A local boy, he had graduated from Gaithersburg High School in 1977, then earned a business degree from the University of Maryland. Sonny didn't want to work for someone else, so he started a landscaping business out of his Grandin Avenue home in Rockville, which specialized in brickwork, stonework, and lily ponds. He shared the home with his mother until spring of 2002. Then he moved over the summer to Grayson County, Virginia, where his father, a former Montgomery County police officer, had purchased a Christmas tree farm in Abingdon. Sonny and his father had spent the summer building a, quote, dream house together on the farm. They were very close, Sonny and his dad, and Sonny's sister Victoria will say that her brother was, quote, her best friend. So you've got this super close-knit family. And although Sonny had moved away, he was still honoring the decade-long contract to mow Fitzgerald Automotive for his friend, the owner, Dottie Fitzgerald. The family-run auto dealership on Rockville Pike was one of the county's most congested streets. So a super busy area. And he's not even living there anymore. But he's come back, because he's such a good dude, to mow the grass for this business.
Right.
I mean, again, sounds like an awesome guy, right?
And once again, a very busy part of town is where this next event's going to happen.
And his sister said that although Sonny had never been married, he had found a woman that he loved. He was taken to Suburban Hospital while his friend Rob Smith, the dealership service manager, sobbed beside him. Sadly, he died en route to the hospital. A friend, Rose Wilkes, would tell the press, quote, "He was just unbelievable. If you needed him, no matter what, he would always be there." So we have 2 men killed in random shootings within 24 hours of each other, which was just baffling. Major Crimes had already assembled early to continue their investigation into the Martin murder. So they set up a perimeter around the auto mall. Sonny, who was utilizing a powerful lawn boy mower, had stopped for a sip of water before he fell. He clutched his chest and stumbled forward toward the auto mall. An employee named Al Briggs was the first person to see him. A 911 call was made with a voice saying, quote, "This guy with a lawnmower did something, man. It chopped him up. He's bleeding real bad." He had a wound to the stomach as, quote, "wide as a coffee cup," according to a witness.
Oh, my gosh.
However, the hospital, in a state of confusion, diagnosed Sonny's death as an industrial accident, as there were debates that he had fallen under the running mower or that maybe the mower, the motor had exploded on the mower.
Okay, like something happened with the mower.
However, an officer that had gone to the hospital was not buying this was an industrial accident. And quickly was like, "I'm pretty sure this looks like a gunshot wound." Montgomery County Police quickly became overwhelmed because at 8:12 a.m. at a mobile gas station in Aspen Hill, 54-year-old Premkumar Walekar was shot. An Indian native, he immigrated to the United States in 1968, eager to attend college. He worked hard to build the American dream. Walekar had done well. He had attended college part-time while working at Hot Shops restaurant. Considered shy but hardworking, He ended up quitting school to work full-time, taking a truck driving job with a magazine distributor, picking up bundles at 4 a.m. to deliver to stores along his route. He loved to cook and spent nights working in restaurants. Every month, he sent money home to India. He was able to send enough money that his father purchased a taxi cab instead of renting one. He was richly rewarded for his hard work, eventually marrying his wife, Margaret. She was the sister of his brother's girlfriend, and his brother did a little bit of matchmaking. They started kind of, doing the letter writing and that sort of thing. And then Prem Kumar traveled to India to meet Margaret. Within 2 days, they had fallen deeply in love and got married.
Oh, how sweet.
So it was like a whirlwind romance. They bought a home on Rolling Acres Way, which was a picturesque neighborhood, and that's where they were able to raise their 2 children. They also purchased a home in Pune, India, where they planned to retire as soon as their daughter graduated from the University of Maryland. Their son was a computer programmer. Both children in their 20s still lived at home. Prem Kumar drove a taxi cab, and he frequently stopped at this mobile station before shift. He's got to fill up, get a drink.
So it's just part of his routine.
Get some snacks. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to get some snacks.
So just about every day. I know that was an important detail for you.
Well, I want some snacks now that you've said that.
On this morning, something unusual happened. Prem Kumar passed his wife Margaret at a traffic light. She was coming home from the night shift at her nursing job, and so they kind of waved at each other. And it was kind of a fun, it's always kind of a fun moment when you pass your partner or your spouse unexpectedly, right?
Yeah, as long as y'all like each other, it's fun.
Oh, yeah?
Well, yeah.
You've passed your partner or spouse that didn't like you?
Well, I'm saying if y'all have...
Did you get the finger or something?
If y'all just recently had an argument or, you just hate each other, but you're living together still, you might be like, fuck you, dude.
When I pull up to the light, I look over at you and make obscene gestures when I see you.
It's like when you realize you're having hallway sex with your partner. And that's just passing each other in the hallway and saying, fuck you.
Ah.
Yeah.
Sounds like you've lived that experience.
It's not a good place.
Is that a lived experience?
It's not a good place to live. It's not a good place to be.
Are you sharing with us, Dylan?
But if you're happily with your loved one, and then, yeah, it's kind of fun. You're like, oh, hey, there they are.
You look over at the light and you see me there. I'm making obscene gestures.
Yeah.
And you're just ignoring me.
Well, yeah.
This type of sexual harassment is so frequent that you just don't even react anymore.
Yeah.
Now, a mechanic spotted the regular customer pumping gas as usual. I mean, he sees this guy just about every day. When suddenly another mechanic named Alex Milhouse saw Prem Kumar slump against a van with blood pooling around him on the blacktop. He was clutching the left side of his body. A female driver inside the van yelled, quote, "He's been shot! He's been shot!" The woman, who happened to be a doctor, jumped out to perform CPR on this stranger.
That's wild.
A bystander flagged down a Montgomery County patrol officer who just happened by. So police actually responded to the Prem Kumar scene first before the Sonny Buchanan scene, even though Sonny Buchanan was killed before Prem Kumar.
So this has happened in a rather quick succession now.
Yeah, like probably within 30 to 40 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. 3 murders had been committed in this very short window of time, but nothing seemed to connect these murders. I mean, at least not yet. Chief Moose, who was set to attend the funeral of a former officer, decided to head to the crime scene, which was unusual. So that's another thing. There's this funeral happening for an officer, fellow officer. And so a lot of the, patrolmen and detectives, investigators are attending this funeral on the same day that this is happening.
Oh, okay.
So you got a lot of people out of office or, there. So that kind of creates a little
more confusion.
Chaos as well. Normally Chief Moose didn't head to crime scenes. I mean, he relied on his people. I mean, he knew they knew their jobs better than he knew their jobs. And so he didn't make a habit of, like micromanaging or whatever. But this was just so strange that he was like, I need to go out and really see what's happening here.
And I think that just reflects what kind of a chief he is. You know what I mean?
And like I said, Moose relied on the knowledge and professionalism of his team, and he knew that they knew their jobs better. So he usually just got out of the way so they could investigate properly. But this was different. I mean, something about these murders was different. Moose encouraged his officers to don their body armor and believed in leading by good example, so he suited up before making the trip out to the mobile station. By the time investigators arrived on the scene, the day was already heating up. It was an Indian summer, warm and dry as fall rolled in. Everything appeared normal. Traffic was heavy with people commuting to work. Others were standing on the sidewalk waiting for the bus. With 3 to 4 patrol cars on the scene, officers had closed the station and placed yellow tape around the perimeter. An ambulance had arrived and taken away Mr. Walakar's body. Captain Walker had already considered the shots were fired from a sniper rifle and also ordered everyone who arrived on the scene to put on their body armor. There was a great deal of questions on everyone's minds, and most were wondering, can we solve this?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you start thinking about, okay, now this, it really starts sinking in that these are long distance shots. It really makes it so much harder to figure out because you don't have a controlled scene. You don't know where it's coming from. You don't know motive. They're missing all these unknowns are key components to get started on an investigation, right?
Yes.
You all usually figure out who, why, when, or, how. And these are all things that they just have, the randomness, and it's happening so quickly now. Multiple scenes, multiple victims, and that's just making it more and more chaotic. So they really don't know what to do, but they're trying to start to be proactive as far as like gearing up. Hey, the shooter could still be on scene. And these are smart thoughts that they're having early on.
With little to go on, investigators switched gears to what they could rule out. So instead of what we need to know, like what can we rule out here? All 3 victims had their wallets on them, which meant robbery was not the motive. The victims were not famous people being targeted. I mean, there were a lot of congressmen and senators living in Montgomery County at the time. So it didn't seem like kidnapping or extortion, something like that was a motive.
Or some kind of retribution.
Right. They were also not domestic, like there weren't domestic disputes. So there was no one who pulled up, had a fight, shot the person, drove off. Nothing like that. There were enough witnesses at the 3 scenes to prove, like I said, no one had pulled up, had words with the victim, shot them. So it's coming from a high-powered rifle a distance away.
And that is the one benefit of this happening in busy locations, is so when you do start this, which is very smart on their part, I think, to rule out what we do know, instead of what we don't know, to go after that, is you have plenty of witnesses, right? It's not happening in some, dimly lit parking lot in the middle of the night or middle of the morning. You're getting
you have the benefit of security cameras.
Yes.
A lot of these businesses have cameras that clearly capture what has happened.
So
even
they can,
if
right.
they're not seeing the assailant.
Yeah. You might not know if this was happening in some desolate part of town. You wouldn't know that someone didn't have an argument beforehand or, all these things they're able to rule out.
Homicides are usually emotional, volatile, and personal. 2 men at a bar who get into a fight that turns deadly, a spouse who takes things too far, a crook trying to rip off a drug dealer. And almost always someone has heard something or seen something in these homicides. In Montgomery County, it was abnormal to find a murder with such scant evidence. The absence of information was all the more alarming for law enforcement. Often at the beginning of the investigation, detectives want to establish a relationship with the victim, learning more about their lifestyle, movements, and associates. And this usually helps establish a relationship between the victim and a suspect. However, at this point in the investigation, detectives had really no theories. Several officers wondered if the perpetrator was watching the scene unfold from a distance. Could the assailant be standing around watching officers clean up his or her mess? The only explanation, it seemed, was that Premkumar Walekar was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The man had simply stopped at the gas station to fill up, had purchased a lottery ticket, and a pack of juicy fruit gum. Just a regular, mundane morning.
Yeah.
Witnesses described Prem Kumar pumping gas, then hearing that loud bang, which sounded like a car backfiring. The doctor at the gas station tried to save the man's life, but there was little that could be done. The victim was unresponsive. Chief Moose watched as media began to swarm the station. News crews were starting to arrive, trying every way they could to capture video and photos of the crime scene. He knew he needed to act fast, with his top priority being protect the public. Next door to the gas station was a Korean Baptist church. He sent an officer over to get permission to set up a mobile command center in their parking lot. When cleared, the bus, which would be used as the mobile command center, was brought in. It would be home base for the investigation, equipped with a conference room, fax machines, internet, computers, and phones. Moose went to work making calls to the mayor, Doug Duncan. Now, they don't actually call him the mayor. His position is county executive.
But it's the equivalent of a mayor?
But he's basically the mayor, yeah.
Okay.
And Moose told him, quote, "We have a mess here. It's not an impossible situation, but it's a difficult situation. And it's going to take some serious police work." Duncan was actually out of town when this happened. And Moose told him, you need to get here as soon as you can.
You need to come back.
Yeah. Forensics with the ATF were called in. And nothing was going right. The command vehicle kept breaking down. The electricity went out. The air conditioning went out. The day had climbed to a hot temperature, and it was making working conditions inside this mobile command center just absolutely miserable. Just a few blocks away from where Prem Kumar had been murdered, 34-year-old Sarah Ramos was waiting for the bus in front of Crisp and Juicy Chicken Restaurant in Silver Spring. I want some crisp and juicy chicken.
I know. It's perfect.
We got a Zaxby's gift card for Christmas. Can we eat some crisp and juicy chicken?
Well, I hope that it's crisp and juicy.
It will be, because I said so. So this was in a busy strip mall in a very densely populated area during the busiest time of day. Again, it's morning commuters. A Salvadoran immigrant, Ramos had lived like a comfortable life in her native country. She was married to an economics professor named Carlos Cruz, yet Sarah knew what America could offer for their 7-year-old son, Carlos Jr. After finishing up her first year in law school, she convinced her husband to move to Maryland with their young son. Carlos Sr. spoke limited English and was working part-time at a grocery store at night. Sarah hoped to one day become a lawyer, but was primarily supporting the family working as a housekeeper and a babysitter. They lived with her sister, but Sarah dreamed that soon they would have a home of their own like they did back in El Salvador. Her niece, Rena Villatoro, said, quote, "She was always planning. She felt she needed to work hard to make these plans happen." Always smiling, Sarah was known as a warm wife, caring mother, and a very trustworthy nanny and housekeeper for several families. And as a matter of fact, she was employed by a man named Larry Gaffigan, who happened to be close friends with the victim, James Martin. He said, quote, "She didn't speak much English, but she was quite a presence. Kids loved her." She was deeply religious and involved in her Catholic church. Just 2 weeks earlier, she had attended a weekend retreat and had come back so spiritually moved that she inspired family members to take their faith more seriously, and they started going to church and becoming more active.
Okay.
So while she's waiting at her usual spot on a bench, she's just sitting there reading a book. Ramos was struck in the head by a bullet. It passed through the window of the chicken restaurant. A motorist called the Montgomery County Police Department to report a suicide. Once officers arrived on the scene, suicide was ruled out. In that moment, law enforcement faced the stark realization that their county was under attack, yet they had no idea who was responsible or how to stop the carnage. While there were no connections, it seemed, among the victims, it left a possibility of maybe gang violence. There were several violent gangs operating in and around the area, so that kind of popped up as is this some kind of gang initiation or...
Right.
Since the shootings were just a year after September 11th and some 6 months after the anthrax case, terrorism immediately went to the top of the list. This is when Montgomery County Police Department began reaching out to other agencies, including the Maryland State Police. A landscaper working close to where Ramos was shot while she's just sitting there reading a book. I mean, I don't know why that detail just really disturbs me.
Well, it's because everyone does
It's such a
this.
peaceful,
Yeah.
I'm just sitting on a bench reading a book.
Yeah, anyone who rides the bus a lot, you have a good book because you might have to wait, now and again it stops or what, and that's one benefit of riding the bus. You get on it, you don't have to, pay attention to where you're going.
Yeah, you have some time.
You have some time, and a lot of people read, and this is a very normal thing to be doing.
So while she's, being shot, this landscaper noticed that there was a white van with 2 men in it leaving the parking lot immediately following the shooting, heading north. And it seemed like maybe they were driving a little erratically.
Like they were kind of getting out of there.
Right. It was the first time anyone had a hint that maybe it wasn't a lone gunman. A Be on the Lookout went out to all surrounding counties and smaller police departments, as well as the D.C. Metropolitan Police and state troopers assigned to the Rockville Barracks to look for this white van.
Which is a very generic description of a vehicle.
We're going to talk about that. Though forensic analysis wasn't, yet available, I mean, this is all happening so quick, they hadn't really had time to process the forensics at any of these scenes.
Right.
They actually are able to get rushes on the autopsies because sometimes that can take months to get an autopsy report back, but they are able to get autopsies done fairly quickly with these victims. So that is a positive. But it was obvious to trained investigators that it was a high-speed bullet fired from a rifle. That meant one thing, a sniper. But it was only speculation as to why it was occurring. In the fast-paced world of investigations, especially during this critical time, there wasn't really time for speculation. The immediate crisis was trying to stop the killing. The only way police could prevent that was to flood the area with as many police officers as possible. Nothing was concrete, though. Investigators were still trying to make any connections between the victims and locating a motive. Plus, they had to proceed with caution. There was no indication this van had any connection to the shootings, and it could be a lone sniper. Then there was another shooting. A call came in around 9:58 a.m. from a Shell station at 10515 Connecticut Avenue in Kensington, Maryland, which, Dylan, was only 2.7 miles from my house. And I remember passing this gas station on my way home and seeing the police tape.
Oh my gosh.
After this had happened.
That's crazy.
And I'll tell you more about my experience on this day and then the days that followed. Because I worked for a company that had a fleet of white vans and box trucks.
Oh gosh.
And we were, as a business, very impacted by this situation. All right, so 25-year-old Lorianne Lewis Rivera was vacuuming the inside of her minivan at the Shell station, which is only a few miles from that crisp and juicy chicken restaurant. She was shot once in the upper back. Witnesses said she fell onto the ground with blood pouring out of her nose and mouth. Owner John Mystery would tell police he heard what sounded like a car backfire, then saw the woman hit the ground. Jimmy Axa was tinkering with a BMW in the service bay. He described hearing what sounded like an airbag exploding. Others thought there had been a car crash at the busy intersection, but saw traffic was flowing smoothly. So it kind of took a few minutes to even register what had happened, right?
Right.
Lewis was married to a Honduran immigrant and had a preschool-age daughter named Jocelyn. She was from Idaho originally and considered a kind, soft-spoken woman who was like family to the neighbors that resided in her apartment building near Langley Park. Lewis had trained to become a nanny in Oregon and then had moved to Maryland after getting a position as a nanny in Northern Virginia. Lori Ann and her husband Nelson had met through a local Mormon church, and they were planning to buy their first home. Like, that was their big goal. Security footage recovered from the gas station and surrounding businesses captured the moment when Lori Ann was struck by the bullet, but there was nothing on the video of value as to the suspect or the suspect's vehicle. As a precaution, all the schools in Montgomery County were placed on Code Blue alert and locked down. Outdoor activities were suspended. Through bits and pieces, the public was beginning to learn what was happening in their normally quiet community. A sniper out there killing random people was a nightmare scenario for law enforcement. If this was a terrorist cell, the next logical step would be to take out a law enforcement officer or two.
Right. And I'm sure that's in the back of their minds at every one of these scenes, right?
Well, it is. The seeds of panic had already been planted with the general public. So now Chief Moose and many others were thinking, okay, so the next step is to target officers. That would show the police department and the government weren't able to protect the public. That's what they're thinking if this is a terrorist.
Right. They're going to keep dialing it up. They're going to keep making it worse, right?
Investigators began mapping out the locations of the shootings, and most were in the Aspen Hill area. They tried to figure out what route was being taken by the killer and assumed the next victim would be within a close distance. And although Chief Moose suspected it was the work of a serial sniper choosing victims at random, he wanted the investigation to arrive at that scenario without interference. So even though that's what he's thinking, he's trying not to influence his detectives or sway them one way or another.
Right, because that can create a bias in the investigation, and he wants this to be supported by what evidence they do have.
Yes. Many of Montgomery County's officers had attended the funeral, as I mentioned earlier, and without being asked, most of them, even the off-duty officers, returned as soon as they received news of these shootings. More and more officers were moving into the area, creating a show of force. Moose knew tactical teams were important and began moving in the SWAT team and their equipment. Uniformed officers carried 9mm and had shotguns, but they needed to bring in long guns and people who knew how to use them. If the suspect flipped out, went berserk, or holed up somewhere, they would need teams to be able to take him out from a distance. All the equipment needed to be moved into this area, which would be a challenge because it's a crime scene. It's also, these are really busy parts of town, tons of traffic, people commuting all day long, buses.
And you also have multiple scenes.
And then you have to move a lot of heavy equipment and that kind of thing into this area.
Well, yeah, and it's all about the effectiveness of the firearms. You know, pistols and shotguns are only effective up to a certain range. And so if you have a firefight with someone, you're definitely going to want rifles, which, are a much more common piece of police gear nowadays. Most officers, I think, on all levels have keep rifles in their trunks and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think they have kind of a choice of what weapons they carry. I mean, I think they have their 9mm that's issued, but just some of the officers I've known, it's kind of like they have a choice of, do they want, somebody might have an AR-15, somebody might have a shotgun, it's just kind of different.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was that famous case in LA, that bank shootout on the streets where the police were obviously outgunned and the perpetrators were heavily armored and heavily armed, and that was just a fucking shit show, you know what I mean? They literally couldn't stop those guys.
Are you sure you're talking about a real thing, or are you talking about a Wayne Grove from the movie Heat?
Elements of the true story robbery are in Heat.
Yeah, I know.
Big
I'm just
time.
Giving you a hard time.
Come on.
I know how much you love Heat.
Nah, do that video of that, because there's plenty of live video of this shootout. Is insane.
I'll have to look it up because I know what you're talking about, but it's I don't remember
these
details,
guys had
the year or anything like that. So
I mean, they were just literally standing there taking round after round, but continuing to fire this high-powered, fully automatic fire from these weapons they had, and the cops, their pistols and stuff could not penetrate their body armor that the perpetrators were wearing, and they're just walking out in the open and it's like some shit out of a movie. I mean, it really is.
It's probably why it was taken and used in a movie.
Yeah, it's truly crazy.
Now, helicopters were dispatched getting surveillance from the air. A lot of energy was being spent scheduling officers for the coming days. They wanted visible patrols out, boots on the ground, especially around the schools, but they also wanted to make sure that they were able to get coverage for the following days because they weren't sure how long this would draw out.
Well, yeah. I mean, all these investigators are humans, and they're going to get tired, and they're going to need some time off, and you need to go home and, poop, shower, and shave, if you will, and get a few minutes of rest. So
it was difficult to argue a hate crime motive, as the victims ranged from different ethnicities, ages, and genders. From all accounts, these killings seemed random, and that was a terrifying thought, because no one was safe. At 10:12 a.m., Captain Nancy Demme appeared before reporters and said, quote, "We're experiencing a crime, an ongoing crime that we have not experienced before." With such little information to go on and an eyewitness account about the sighting of this white van or box truck leaving a shooting scene, they had to start somewhere. In the days to come, there would be other mentions of white panel trucks, step vans, but there were a great number of white vans and box trucks in this area.
There's a great number.
All around Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., Maryland.
There's a great number of white box vans and trucks in every city, big, large, and small. I mean, it's one of the most basic utility vehicles that a lot of different businesses use. And they also come from a fleets, and they're made a certain way. They're very basic. They're typically white. And that keeps costs down when you're buying multiple vehicles at a time. And they're just everywhere you look. If I drove from here across the area I live in, I'm going to see multiple white vans and box trucks.
Later, it will be revised to a description of a white box truck with possible black lettering on the side and damage to the rear lift gate. The manufacturer was either Isuzu or Mitsubishi. They thought.
This tip early on, I think I saw a van, a white van tearing out of the parking lot. I think it hurt the investigation.
I think it did too.
I really do. When it turns out you realize in the end what vehicle was being used, which honestly, I mean, I don't want to give any credit, but was really smart from the perpetrator's perspective.
Well, there was such desperation in these moments. I mean, look at this, Dylan. You have back-to-back shootings, I mean, all within like 25 to 45 minutes of each other.
They've not even had time to process one scene.
The police department is completely overwhelmed.
Yeah. Well, I can understand.
They have no idea what's going on, and I think they were just so desperate for any clue, anything to help. They latched onto the box truck or the white van just to have something to go on.
Oh, and I understand that, and I'm not blaming them, but I think in retrospect, it certainly held the investigation back, and a lot of energy was spent. And this happens many times in big investigations or things that unfold very quickly, and that's okay.
Multiple agencies began blanketing roads, pulling over hundreds of white vans and trucks. Maryland State Police dispatched 60 plainclothes officers to stake out shopping centers and gas stations around Montgomery County. No one knew if the killer was done for the day. Yet, the state police's lieutenant will later say, quote, "I don't even know what to tell them to look for."
Right.
So as I mentioned before, Dylan, I was working in this area. I was working in Northwest D.C. in the Friendship Heights area, which is just below Bethesda, not very far from the county line to go into Montgomery County. And I worked at a florist, and we were a very old, established business, had been in business like 70 years, very well known. We had a fleet of box trucks and vans. We made deliveries like all over Virginia, Maryland, DC, standing orders at the big hotels, and we were like super busy. Probably had 60 employees when you counted the florists and the drivers and the customer service and all that. And our drivers for days and days and days were like impacted by the search for these vans and box trucks.
Constantly being
pulled over, being searched. And it's a florist, so you have bouquets and plants and whatnot, and police combing through the vehicle, and deliveries being late, and I mean, it was chaos, road closures. I mean, so we were getting a lot of feedback from customers, feedback from our drivers, like it was just not going very well.
So, and I'm going to assume this was happened to many businesses in the area.
I'm sure.
All
Well,
businesses.
because I always think about that. I'm like, we were one business out of thousands that probably utilize box trucks or white vans, from caterers to, just
Construction.
everybody.
Everything. Yeah.
Electricians, plumbers, whatever. So I can't imagine how. It's just like it just disrupted the workflow. It was disrupting lives. It was crazy.
It was what they call a shit show.
It was a crazy time. We were scared. You didn't even want to go pump gas. You were waiting till you were down on like very, very low E to pump gas, and people were like shielding themselves like between the pump and their car door.
Trying to make themselves a smaller target.
You would see people hunkered down. You would see people like sitting in their cars pumping gas, like scared, kind of laying down on the seat. People were afraid to go in the grocery store. You had someone dropping a person off at the front door, and they'd make a run for it into the store and then be circling around the parking lot, like ready to pick up their partner who's doing the grocery shopping.
And they dive in the door with eggs and milk.
You would see people parking and like running into the store with like their hands covering their heads, like that was going to help a high-powered rifle. But it was absolute confusion. And I keep using the word terror, but I don't know how to describe it. It was frightening.
Well, no, that's what happens when the random element of it and everything, and the how quickly the different shootings happen back to back, and people know. There were reports of people running in zigzag.
Oh no, that was absolutely
across
true.
Parking lots.
You would
and
see
stuff.
that. I lived 2 blocks from the metro station. And I would often either ride the train, and sometimes I would drive my car to work. But I got in a habit of walking to the metro station. I didn't even want to do that. I was scared. So I would drive to the metro station and park and take the train, or just drive to work because I was so afraid to walk to the metro station.
Yeah.
My roommates all took the train, and we were all just like scrambling to figure out like, how do we navigate this? Like, we have to get places, but if you don't have a car and you're living in the city and you're using public transportation, you don't want to go wait on the bus. You're going to have to take a train. How are you going to get there? It was a lot. It was a lot to deal with. With each passing hour and no other reports of shootings, law enforcement breathed a sigh of relief. The news swept across the county, and parents started taking their kids out of school. All outdoor activities were canceled. Office workers spent the day inside their buildings, having lunches delivered. Walking to the ATM seemed like a great risk. People were afraid to go to the metro station or sit at a bus stop. It left streets and sidewalks virtually deserted. Some businesses closed because no one wanted to be exposed. Between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., the county's 911 system fielded 2,022 calls, compared to 680 calls the day before. At 11:19 a.m., Chief Moose appeared at a press conference. In less than 24 hours, 5 murders had occurred within the community. He urged residents to stay vigilant, report any suspicious activities, even if it meant waiting on the line. He admitted the 911 center was overwhelmed with calls, but promised every resource was being used. He urged parents not to panic and rush to remove their children from schools. He just said, please let the day unfold, that there were no indications schools were being targeted. He encouraged residents to remain calm. Moose didn't take any questions from reporters, letting them know, quote, you have the information that we have available. The homicide rate had increased 25% in a single day.
That's crazy.
Evening rush hour went along as expected, with people needing to get from one place to another, mostly by car. At 7:01 p.m., an officer with the Washington District of Columbia, the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, stopped a blue 1990 Chevrolet Caprice with a New Jersey plate in the 4400 block of Georgia Avenue Northwest. The driver gave the officer a license and registration listed to John Allen Muhammad. Everything matched. The officer returned the license and let him go. Muhammad was the only person in the vehicle at the time. This was the fourth time the Caprice had been checked since October 1st, when officers from Fairfax, Virginia ran the plates at 1:24 a.m. On October 2nd, a Montgomery County police officer requested a check at 10:51 on the plates, and less than 2 hours after James Martin was killed at Shoppers Warehouse, a Montgomery County officer, suspicious about the Caprice, ran the tags again. Nothing had raised a red flag. Yet, at the time, not even the FBI had any kind of system that could track multiple vehicle checks from one jurisdiction to another. The Caprice, like a phantom, was able to haunt its way from place to place. And this is where we'll end part 1 of our Beltway Sniper series.
Oh my gosh. I guess I forgot how quickly this all happened. You know what I mean?
It was like a rapid succession.
Yeah, very.
I mean, all of this before 11 in the morning. From 7 a.m. to 11 a.m.
That's crazy.
In this 4-hour span, you have 4 murders in different parts of town.
Yeah, and it's totally basically terrorized the entire region. All in that very short time.
Well, like I said, we will have a part 2 coming out.
Oh, yeah?
Of course. It's a big case.
It is a big case, and it was a crazy time.
We have a lot of details to cover. Dylan, I just wanted to make mention of a few things. In the last few days, I have received 2 emails from listeners who found our podcast because they were researching a specific crime. One person wrote in an email that she was friends with a victim and kind of shared some of her personal understandings of the case and thoughts and feelings with us. And it was just deeply moving. And then we had a second listener write in and let us know that her uncle was the perpetrator in a crime that we covered, and just how traumatic it was and just changed the family dynamic.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it's like I said, it's just so deeply moving to get these very personal emails from folks.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think sometimes it's easy to forget when you hear one of these stories, because I listen to so much true crime, that there are people and families involved and left over after the dust settles, and they're never the same. You know, they're torn apart in many different ways. Families on both sides, the perpetrator's family, and when you realize that someone in your family is capable of something like that, and the victim's families. And it was very touching when you recounted that, those emails to me, and I found it amazing, and I could tell that it really meant something to you because of the work you do.
Yeah, you know, when someone reaches out and says, hey, I was, thinking of my friend and found your podcast, and, you're the only podcast that's covered her case, and the attention to detail and the story you told, I'm just glad her memory's alive and that people are still thinking of her. And it's just so touching to hear that. And I don't know, we just love our listeners so much. You guys are great.
Yeah, they're amazing.
And 6 years in, Dylan.
Happy birthday. All right.
All right. If you are feeling froggy and would like to support the podcast, you can join us at patreon.com/Mountain Murders Podcast. Dylan.
It really is the best birthday present you can give Mountain Murders.
Yeah. You can join for less than a cup of coffee at your favorite coffee shop place.
And access a ton more extra content over the 500.
There, it's ad-free episodes, so you don't have to listen to the ads every couple of minutes. I know our hosting site likes to pop in a lot of ads.
And we get extra goofy sometimes over there on the Patreons.
Yeah, sometimes our Patreon episodes that are exclusive to Patreon are maybe a little more ridiculous, which I don't even know if that's possible, but it is. It is. All right, Dylan, it has been great sitting down with you today, as always.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that, and I look forward to the second part.
You're such a sassy cat.
And again, happy birthday to Mountain Murders, and happy birthday to you and your creation, Heather. And I love the listeners. Thank you, guys. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for 6 years of awesomeness.
Yes.
We really do love you guys.
Yo.
Bye, Dylan.
Bye.